The rules of the game is an important topic. It sort of differs a little bit from the topics we've been discussing, but I think it's important for you to understand this topic because it tells you a lot about the games you play in. And you're going to find out as we go through this session, there's a lot of situations in life that I call games. Could be a job, could be a marriage, could be, team, whatever it is. I look at it as sort of a game. And I want to just give you a couple of examples before we get into this, where the rules of the road were not, or the rules of the game were not played fairly. Nobody likes a cheater. I mean, one of the things that we all have a bad taste in our mouth about if somebody cheated in a game we're in, if it's a card game or a football game or whatever we're doing, we don't like cheating. And I'll just give you a couple of examples of that from recent experience and one from one of my own experiences. One, you heard several years ago, there was a thing called Inflategate, where Tom Brady, a famous quarterback, Hall of Fame quarterback, didn't need to use this change or exception to the rule by deflating the ball so we get a better grip on it so he could throw it, because he was an outstanding quarterback. But he went through a whole thing where they fined him for several games and they charged him so much because he had somebody that was inflating the footballs, put a little less air in them than the rules say you should have in them. And what it did is it caused a bit of put a little bit of a black cloud over Tom Brady and over the New England Patriots. And he didn't really need to do it. I mean, sometimes people cheat because they think, well, it'll make them do better or be better thought of or whatever. But there's never a good time to cheat. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples. That's one of them. The other one was Western used to sponsor a race car. It was a sort of a modified Formula One car. It didn't do pit stops and things like that. It was a feeder series to the Indy 500. And we had all the cars were supposed to be exactly the same because this is where new drivers and young drivers got their experience to eventually drive in the Indy. And so all the cars had the same engine, same setup, same everything. It really got down to the skill of the driver. There was one car in that series of races that always won the race. And so I went to our driver and I said, I'm missing something here because these cars all have the same engine. These cars all have, the same setup. They all have the same tires. Everything's the same. And this guy usually wins by 1 or 2 laps. I said, something's strange here. And he gets this sort of pained look on his face and he goes, well, that guy's a cheater. I said, what do you mean he's a cheater? He says, well, he modified his engine, even though we're not supposed to. The rules say we can't do that. He modified his engine because he thought winning was the most important thing to his career. Now, when I looked at that, I said to myself, there are lots of people that I run across in business that cheat, that don't follow the rules of the game, that don't play by the rules. And at the end of the day, all I think about with them is that they're not good leaders. They're not good managers. They're just cheaters. And if you don't know how to play by the rules, and if you can't play by the rules, then maybe you should get out of the game. And so as we get into this whole session on rules of the game and different situations you're going to be in, I hope that you'll remember that playing by the rules is an important part of any situation. It's an important part of your integrity. It's an important part of your value system, which we've talked about before. And it's an important part of how I view you as a leader. If you're willing to cheat for your company to get some gain in the competitive marketplace, I'm probably not going to do business with you. One other final example, and I'll stop there. Wells Fargo, a company I did business with for a number of years, started cheating. They started opening up accounts that people didn't know about. They were fined, the largest fine in the history of American corporations. They were fined $1 billion for their cheating and the way they were breaking the rules. So you got to think to yourself, is it important enough for me to break this rule because I may be fined, I may be found out? Wells Fargo, I quit doing business with them because they were not playing by the rules. And so I still have an account there, but it's a very small amount of my money. I do business with a bank that I know has integrity. So I would tell you, as you look at rules, listen carefully to what the rules of the road are. Today we depart a little bit from the STAR model and talk about a topic that I like to discuss. It's called the rules of the game. I'll tell you what I mean by that in just a minute. But this rules of the game segment will help you both in personal and business life. So I would advise you to listen closely today because there'll be some good pearls of wisdom in here. In any situation, whether in business or personal, I like to look at it as you're playing in a game. You're a player in a game. So you think about it that way and you say, well, okay, I'm a player in a game. What are the rules of the game? And as you know, when you play baseball, there's certain rules. When you play football, you play soccer, there's all rules of the game that you go by. That's really how you play the game successfully. You know, if you're in a marriage, for example, and I'll just give you the rule that Christ made for your marriage, which is kind of interesting, pretty high level rules. It says, husbands, you should love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave his life for it. And I always tell people, listen, that's a pretty high standard that God gave you. So, you know, if you're playing this game called marriage and you're not loving your wife the way Christ loved the church, well, you're not playing it right. So, pretty high standard. But I'm gonna spend more time on the business part of it now as we go into this. So, what about something a little easier as it relates to marriage? My wife and I, for example, had spending decisions that we had rules on, and we would say, okay, if it's $500 or more, we'll discuss it before we spend the money. And so that's an easy one to do. That's a little easier to abide by than, you know, loving your wife the way Christ loved the church. And, you know, if you look at marriages, about half of them end in divorce. So I guess you could say as a society, we don't really know the rules of the game of marriage. I told my wife, all the time, I said, listen, I know the rules of the game and rules of the game in business. I'm really good at it. I know how to play the game. I know how the unwritten rules, the written rules, all that. But in marriage, I wasn't quite as good. So I just start with that to say that, hey, listen, there's rules of the road and rules of the game in any situation you're in. So make sure when you're in relationships that you understand the rules of the road and the rules of the game. So, you know, I always told my wife that, you know, I would try to play by the rules, but I didn't always know the rules of marriage. So she understood what I meant. So anyway, what about rules of the game? How did this all come to be? My son-in-law, who's a firefighter, came to me one day and he said, hey, Mike, I'm looking for a job where I can make more money. And I said, oh, that's good. That's great, because he's married to my daughter, right? I know she's a very expensive habit. So I said, well, what do you mean, Mike? He said, well, you know, I go to work. I'm a firefighter. And a lot of the guys I go to work with are really not motivated. They don't work hard. I work hard. I really put in the hours. I really do everything I can to stay in shape. I do, you know, all these things. And they make the same amount of money that I make. I said, oh, okay. And I said, well, Mike, that's called the rules of the game that you're in. And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, in the firefighting business, when you do a great job or an okay job or an outstanding job, you make the same amount of money as everybody else in that grade. I said, if you're in a game where the rules are that you can only play the game and make a certain amount of money, then there's several things you need to look at. He says, what do you mean? I said, well, are you going to stay in firefighting? He said, oh, yes, I love firefighting. I said, well, then that's the game you're in. So now you got to figure out, well, can I change the rules of the game? Not likely. Those guys have been doing that for years, and there's this whole structure. I said, okay. All right, well, then maybe you need to look at, if you can't change the rules of the game, maybe you should play in a different game. He goes, oh, no, I don't really want to do that. I really love firefighting. I really love doing what I, enjoy working with these guys on this team and responding to emergency situations. And I said, okay. All right, well, maybe there's a third option where you can modify the game you're playing in. He goes, what do you mean? I said, well, you're a firefighter, so you have, 3 days on work and 3 days off work. What are some of the other people in your organization doing to make more money? He said, well, there's some guys that do moving. They have a firefighters moving company, and they, move people during their off days, when they're off for those 3 days. A bunch of them have banded together and they do moving. I said, okay. So your solution may be that you want to modify the rules of the game you're in. Not modify, but maybe play in two different games that you can play, successfully. He said, okay. And so Mike began to look at what he could do. He decided, since we're in a very hot real estate market here near Austin, Texas, that he would play in a game called real estate. And Mike is one of those go-getters that he doesn't just play in a game. He plays to win. So I won't tell you that, the market is a little slow right now, but in the first year, Mike more than doubled his salary. And Mike took this game called real estate, and he learned how to play in it successfully. And so that's really Mike's solution to making more money and staying in the game or the job that he was in. So what are some other things you need to look at when you look at this? What do you if you don't like the game you're in and you can't modify the game you're in, what are some more games that you can go into, or how do you look at how you play the game that you're in? So first you want to look at, okay, which game do I want to play in? What are my strengths? There's a thing called a SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. You need to look at your strengths. You need to figure out, okay, what do I do better? What could I do better than anybody else? And do you need to do that in the game you're in now? Do you need to play in a different game? Maybe join a different company? And know the rules better than anyone. If you're in a game called firefighting, know the rules. Know the rules better than anybody else. I mean, you look at people that are playing in certain games, and this is really an actual game. If you look at Kobe Bryant, for example, well, let me just talk for a minute about another example before I get into that. But there was this guy named Fosdick. Fosdick saw the rules of the game in high jumping. And many of you that have followed high jumping for a number of years know that the maximum people could jump over a high jump bar was probably about 5.5 feet at some future point. Because what they did is they ran up to the bar and they dove over the top of it. Well, Fosdick said, you know what? I'm going to change the rules of this game. I'm going to run up, I'm going to plant my back foot, and I'm going to fall over the bar. I'm going to plant my back foot and jump over the bar. Well, as you know, as a result of that change in the game, change in the rules, people can now jump 7 feet in a high jump. So understand what the rules of the game are, and if you can change them. You might be able to change them like Fosdick did. So if you look at how people play games, you need to decide what you're going to do. You're going to play in that game, change the rules. You're going to play in a different game, or you're going to modify the rules of that game. So once you are in a business situation or a game, what should you do to succeed? Well, I told you before, the world belongs to those that give 110%. So you should decide you're going to play at the top level of that game. Decide to play the game by the rules, or change the rules, or play in a different game. React to inflection points. People that are ahead of the game, that are winning in games, are all often able to anticipate inflection points, things where the game will change, where people will go in a different direction, and you anticipate those changes. Wayne Gretzky, the great hockey player, said, when somebody asked him, how do you get to the hockey puck so fast? He goes, well, I skate to where the puck's going to be. And with Gretzky, he could see from the way the guy was hitting the puck, that's where he should be. He should get to that point where the puck was going to be, not where it was. So anyway, make sure that you understand all the rules of the game, that you play by the rules. And in any game, there are unwritten and written rules. Now, those of you that are married know exactly what I'm talking about. So when your wife says to you, does this dress make me look fat? The unwritten rule of that game is, no, dear, it's lovely. You look wonderful. You've never looked better. And some of you that don't know how to play the game say, yeah, it does make you a little large around the edge. That's one, that's not a recipe for a long marriage, but it's taking the unwritten rules and understanding what they are for any situation you're in, any relationship, any employer situation, any game. It's knowing what the unwritten rules are. So take time to understand what the unwritten rules are for that game. Be consistent. Any game you want to do, any game you want to play in, consistency builds your confidence and confidence that others have in you. If you're in this game called marriage and you're trying in that relationship to build trust, well, you wouldn't necessarily build trust by going out after work every time and telling your wife, oh, I love you, I want to spend time with you, and then you're doing something that doesn't fly in the face of reinforcing that value that you're trying to create in the marriage. So make sure you're consistent. Keep promises and deliver. Important, particularly when you're raising children or when you're hiring employees or working with employees in the same area. Make sure that you are keeping the promises and delivering on your results. And then do what you say you will do. I can't tell you how many times that I would say to somebody, hey, I'm going to do this and such and such. And finally got to the point where there were so many things going on in my world that I had a person that traveled around with me. And I said, listen, if I commit to something, you write it down, because I may not remember it because I got so many things going on at any one time, but you make sure that we keep the commitment to that person. So be consistent. So I'll just give you a situation in consistency. Kobe Bryant, the great basketball player who's since passed away, was known as a ball hog. He wouldn't pass the ball. And people said, well, Kobe, why don't you pass the ball? And he goes, I'm not going to pass the ball because I know the people that I'm going to pass it to are not working as hard as I am to get better at their game. And he said, well, what do you mean by that? He says, well, I'm in the gym every morning at 5 o'clock. I'm practicing my shots. I'm practicing my dribbling. I'm practicing all those things that will make me better at my game. And he said, if I saw all those guys in the gym with me, I'd be passing the ball to them. But I'm not passing the ball to them because they're not there, and I am. So important. Know the risk, but seize the opportunity. Any game you play in is full of risks. Many things that you won't be able to see around the corner or over the hill. It's okay to take the risk. Know what the risks are. I mean, to analyze risks. Don't just go being, I like people that do skydiving. The comedian Stephen Smith says, you're only given one chance to do skydiving right. He's right about that. But, make sure you're taking calculated risk. You're doing things that will, if you take the risk, the reward is there. In business, for example, business leaders are required to blaze new trails because they see new technology, new products, etc. It takes courage sometimes to make those kinds of decisions, but that's really part of what you want to do in this area. Respect other players in the game. It's like I always respected teams that respected me. If I were playing in a game or against a competitor or something in a business environment, I would respect them if they respected me. I mean, my goal in business really was to beat their brains out and beat them in the marketplace. But I respected them as people, and if they respected me, then I would make sure that I respected them. One of the areas in business that we did that at Western Union was we traded patents. We had a lot of patents on things that people wanted, and what we did was we had patents and we would trade them. Even with competitors, we'd say, listen, you got a patent we want, we've got one you want, we'll trade you that patent so that we can license each other to do that particular task. Have a sense of humor. Keep things in perspective. Don't get yourself so uptight that you don't do the right thing because you're so uptight. I mean, I've been around people that are so tightly wound that they can't ever laugh. They can't ever relax. I mean, I always... here's my idea of a good meeting, and a lady that worked with me, Liz Palmetti, did this for us with meetings. She would say, okay, what do you want to do? I said, well, okay, first day we're going to meet. We're going to have a nice dinner. We're going to get together with all the regional managers. We're going to find out what's been going on in their lives personally. Next day we're going to meet all day. We're going to talk about what the metrics were for the business, how we were doing, how they were doing in their area. And the next day was team building. And she'd always say, well, what does team building mean? I said, well, it means that in the rules of the game called management, you need to understand who your players are. You need to understand who your people are at a personal level. And so we would do things like one year we did a behind-the-scenes tour of the San Diego Zoo. One year we did a tour of the Louisville Slugger factory in Kentucky. One year we did a training, we saw where the Top Gun pilots were trained at Miramar Naval Air Station. So having a sense of humor and keeping things in perspective was good for your people to see. So be a student of the game you're in. Know the rules of the game. I think that's important. Continue to learn from customers, colleagues, competitors. Improve your game skills. Avoid complacency at all costs. You want to be known for doing things and getting things done. And if you're in a game where you're getting complacent, you probably want to change games. I mean, if Mike couldn't change everything in the firefighting business, he might want to have just changed companies altogether. So important that we know all these things. One last thing on knowing the rules of the game. Play the long game. Don't do things that are short term. Don't do things that will maybe benefit you short term but not benefit you long term. Do things with integrity. Do things with purpose. Be deliberate in the way you run your business. and you will be successful. And so that's really the rules of the game. Whatever game you're playing in, play it well. Thank you.